So on that note, right, first of all, we do want to acknowledge the City of Newark, Mayor Baraka, and the Office of Education for putting this together. How many people in this room are educators? Okay, so a lot of us. How many people are parents? Okay, a lot of us. How many of us are young people? I say young, period, yes. How many of us are just like allies in the work? We want to see young people win, regardless of our title, position, et cetera, right? And so that's why we're here, because as we know, this work of education only works if it is about equity, which is making sure that every single kid, regardless of where they come from, what their native tongue is, the zip code that they live in, are able to win. And so in this space today, talking about diversity, equity, inclusion, we're really going to focus on how both of us kind of call ourselves to this work. My name is Adorian Murray Thomas. I was born and raised right here in the great city of Newark to an incredible mother and father, who one of which, my mom was a public school teacher here in the city. My dad, who was an immigrant from Guyana, became a small business owner. And they let me get away with a lot of things as an only child, but never allowed me to get away without learning. And so it really came down to putting me in great schools, like the Chad School that I went to here in Newark, and then Team Academy, and then ultimately they found that there were some options for me education-wise that weren't in the city. And so they encouraged me to, and my mother, particularly at this point, my father had passed away, which you'll learn about a little bit later, encouraged me to apply to a small school in Western Massachusetts called the Northfield Mount Herman School, where for 4 years I went from being here in Newark, being really pretty much in the majority, right, in the black and brown community, to being one of very few black students at that school, and still having a very enriching experience, but also going from being one of many to one of very few. And so really spent my entire life and career following NMH and then going into college, graduating college, and doing a lot of work in the community in the three spaces. One, the program space, making sure that young people have access to high quality programs in and outside of schools that affirm their identity. I created a nonprofit called She Wins Inc., which works with middle and high school girls in the city of Newark, paying a special attention to young women affected by gun violence, which is my own story of losing my father to gun violence, but also working with young people, regardless of story and background, to be empowered to use their stories to transform their communities. I'm really proud to have even two of my She Wins scholars here in the building. Hey guys, incredible young women doing great things in and beyond Newark. And so I come into this work from the program space, from She Wins, thinking about equity in programs, from my work in Opportunity Youth, working with students who are in the alternative education space, and in the restorative justice space, in the policy space as someone who is an elected school board member here in Newark, and then as just a young person who used to be in school and had a lot of positive experiences and challenges there as well. It is fitting that I would have the honor of actually doing this work with someone who really mirrored for me and like a number of my peers growing up what it meant to lead and educate students from an equity lens, because Mr. Shawadim Regans here was not only my math teacher, but ultimately my principal in middle school. And so it feels really full circle to be sitting here doing this work with someone who has shaped me as in his leadership as an educator, and so many of the people who I grew up with called Mr. Regans not just a principal, but like a father-like figure, and just to all the incredible work he's doing across the city and across the state and really across the country in the equity space now. It's no surprise. A lot of it started right here in Newark. So happy to be here with you.
Appreciate that. Good morning. Good morning. All right. Peace, good people. Shawadim Regans. I am title-wise Chief Equity Strategist for KIPP Team and Family Schools, which are the schools in Newark, Camden, as well as Miami. I was a founder of KIPP Team Academy as a teacher back in 2002, and met Adorian in 2005 when she was a fifth grader. And so that was actually my first year as a school leader, and I continued to teach math at that point. Been in Newark since 2002, born and raised across the water in Harlem. Proud of that. I'll definitely go into some of the work that I do, but I've spent 12 years as a school leader, both at the middle school and high school levels. Now, again, I work across Newark, Camden, as well as Miami, and also a leadership coach. and spend a lot of time in adult learning spaces. And the poetry of this is that we actually didn't even necessarily get together and decide to do a session. We were placed together. And then I think once the connection was made around our connection, then it kind of, just became pretty poetic. So we have a whole session built with will be interactive. And so we'll be at our seats in a second. And we also plan with a little bit of flexibility, but we will provide the slides to you and for you if you want. At the end, we have a QR code that Adorian, of course, set up. I was just going to email you guys and leave it like that. But yeah, let's, oh man, I didn't.
Go back, let them see, let the people see.
Yo, what? I told you that we don't need a picture. We're here, like live. We don't need a picture. Get out of here. All right. So if I can get a reader for the first objective.
We will reflect on the various ways an organization can center diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Okay.
We will ground ourselves in a shared.
Okay. Yep. So learning about the work that we do and what that looks like. And then can I get a different reader for the second objective?
We will ground ourselves in a shared belief that equity is our work, make individual commitments, and support more equitable outcomes.
Okay, so we all have a role in driving towards more equitable outcomes, and so this idea of equity being our includes every single person that's here in this space. These are 4 visual anchors, but 4 agreements. You're invited, as I just demonstrated just now, asking you to read what was on the board here, or on the screen rather. You're invited. I like to say that these are 100% parties, so everybody in this space will be asked to share at some point or another. That pen and paper or the notebook and pen is just kind of a reminder for you to capture what resonates with you, so that what you get from this time in here, it leaves with you and doesn't just stay here in the room. Reflect is just a reminder that we don't learn from experiences, we learn from reflecting on experiences, and so that is significant. And then this last one, there are different interpretations, so I'm going to pause and ask anyone to share what they see and what comes to mind for them. So there's no right answer. What speaks to you when you see that image at the bottom right there?
I would say to me, it speaks to knowledge, it speaks to heart, and it speaks to also support and balancing the knowledge and support. And that way we can be the best of ourselves, and as well as embracing each other and be the best that we can be for each other.
Somebody else want to share what they see with that image?
I like how close they are to each other. So usually when we see that idea of the balance of scales, they're so far from each other, but there's an intimacy to that image that I think is worth noting visually for sure. And then I like it. Thank you.
So you can find the brain and heart image where you have them at opposite ends of the scale or the pendulum. And I like this one in particular because the fact that it's connected. This whole idea, it's business, it's not personal, that is not true. It's all personal. We're people. We bring all the stuff that we've experienced into all things that we do. And it is incredibly important that we use our minds, our consciousness, as well as our hearts, and think about how they work together in order to drive towards more equitable outcomes. So these are agreements, and we're going to ask that everybody kind of keeps these things front of mind throughout the time that we are together. So right now we're going to first reflection. So what we're going to ask is that you take the next 90 seconds to 2 minutes to think about these questions, and we'll have a few people share out. So what are your intentions? Why did you choose to attend this session, and how does this connect to your own goals? Okay? So you can write that down. Doesn't have to be necessarily a narrative form. It could also just be some general notes that you take. And then we'll have a few people share out.
If anyone's like a British person,
So can we get maybe a couple of people to share their intentions? Or you can answer all 3 questions, or you can answer one of them, 2 of them, up to you. And as a teacher, my weight game is strong, so meaning that I'll stand here and wait till somebody says something.
So for me, I just believe that the whole concept of diversity, equity, and inclusion has too often been like a soundbite or a classy title, just something really cute to say that this is what we're doing, and it's not really been about the work. It's only been convenient for grant writing purposes. And so I was curious to hear from 2 people who I believe really do the work and are intentional about it, to hear what you do in this space and how important it is to you and how your life is reflected in the work.
Snaps to that. We can snap it up for each other. I love that. Anybody else want to share? Yeah.
I guess for me, I think I work here at NJIT, and I look at DEI. We are currently hiring someone in Achieve Diversity, and just want to make sure that I know all the different ways to hold that person accountable for our community. And also, I myself trying to learn as much as possible so I can be the best resource for our community as well. And then looking at it, I am a parent, as mentioned before, and I live in a somewhat different world, even though, because my children are more in a PWI environment, and there is a big, diversity and equity I guess reverse gap that they are experiencing as well. So hopefully that the things that I can learn, I can also help them in their growth, as well as moreover help my students here as well in the community, because a lot of them come from PWI to come here as well.
Can I get one of my young peoples to share? Okay. What's your birthday? August, when's your birthday? October?
Yep, happy birthday.
Happy birthday. So just, why this session, or what do you hope to get out of this, or what are you feeling, or what are you thinking? Anything that you want to share?
I don't know. Let me ask you this. How do you feel like, we didn't hear you.
It's okay.
How do you feel like students in your school feel in that school? Like, what does it feel like to be a student at your school? How do y'all feel good? Like, sometimes y'all feel some type of way about things. How do y'all feel?
Good.
Good. Okay, what do you feel good about? What are the things at your school makes you feel happy or good about?
What do you like about your school?
Yeah, what did you like about your school?
What do you like about your school?
The auditoriums are bigger.
Ooh, okay, so the space is good. I love that. Do you like your friends there? You got like good friends there?
Is there a particular time of day or subject or teacher where you feel most positive and excited?
No.
What's your
No,
favorite
none
class?
at all?
Gym.
Gym's speak about that.
Gym.
Why gym? And talk to the mic. Why gym? What about the gym space is welcoming and exciting on the firm?
Because we get to play games.
Okay.
Excellent. And tell everybody what grade you're in.
4th.
Awesome.
Thank you so much.
That's mine. My man over here, if you don't mind.
Hey, so we're here from Patterson, and the school just recently was able to give my colleague here a position as DI specialist. So we're kind of, I feel like, 2 younger, different minds in the school, and we're very motivated and passionate about the need for this. So I think it's good for us to be here to see how you guys are applying this, so that we can bring that back, because the school where we're at is very open to it and is helping us get here. So yeah, we're like agents of this, and we're doing what we got to do to figure out how we can make our school better and address those needs. So yeah. Thank you.
Just one more. I would like to see how diversity could be formed into not just a a color thing, but just how people see, learn from diversity of culture, diversity of thought, diversity of mind. So I would like to see how that can be transformed and learned.
And so if y'all are noticing, there are patterns here, right? What diversity, equity, inclusion actually means, what it feels like, right? Our young person said, I like to feel good in school. She enjoys being in the gym because she gets to play games and be herself, right? Our brother and sister over here actually have positions in same like you were talking about, right? With the folks here at NJIT, where you have roles that are charged to make sure that the space feels diverse, equitable, and inclusive. And so as the parents just said, not just on the lens of having representation as far as who works there, but what it feels like for all involved, right?
So for this, we're about to do a quick activity. If you can move your chairs back to the perimeter of
That's
the room
right.
and rest your belongings and stand up and come to the middle of the room.
So on the topic of feeling, you are invited. You here. We all locked in. So here's what we're going to do, right? We're going to walk you through some questions, and the responses correspond with like these numbers. 4, 3, 2, 1. That's why the game's called Four Corners. Yay, math. So we'll ask a question. There'll be responses up there corresponding with those numbers, 4, 3, 2, 1. And if your answer aligns with the first one, you're gonna go to the 4 corner, right, which is over here. If it aligns with the second one, you're gonna go to the 3 corner, which is there. Third, then second here, then first here, okay? And it'll be pretty intuitive as you see.
You are an adult. We want you to think about your high school experience.
Yes.
Right, so have that in your mind. And for our two young folks, think about your current experience
Right.
in school.
Yep.
So you're in 4th grade, and what grade are you in? 10th? So high school grade, you're in it. Think about what you're currently experiencing.
Okay, based on the questions. So the very first one, what best describes expectations for students at your school? If you feel like it's a school where everybody's kind of welcomed, like Lil Mama was talking about, right? Being able to bring their full selves and personalities, family and culture, you're gonna come over here to 4 is over there. If it's like a little bit like that, you're gonna go to 3, or was for my adults who are thinking back. If it's more like mid, where students are mainly expected to focus on being respectful, following directions, not really asking questions, I want you to come over here to 2. And then if it's like never that type of vibe, it's just boom, 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 without the permission of a staff member, you're here at 1, okay?
If you've been through high school already, we're post-dating her.
Post-dating, I want you to think about when you were in high school, how did it feel? Mine was actually kind of over here. Yeah, mine was around here. Yeah. Yep.
All right. I
Okay.
like that. She's like, how you gonna tell me how I feel in my school? Right? Awesome. All right. Next question.
All right. How do staff or did staff respond to student behavior? If a lot of it was based on those tight relationships, right? Making sure students felt really valued and heard, you're gonna be over here. If it's a little bit of that, right? You'll go over here, right? Staff really trying to make sure they understood the students before they give out consequences. If staff are using the same consequences to address all levels of behavior, right, without really dealing with the nuance and uniqueness, maybe you're in the 2 section.
So get moving. 4, 3.
Yeah. Hey, good to see you. And if it's heavy on the detentions, removal from activities, I want you to be over here. Mine was probably a little bit. It's around here. Yeah. It's around here.
All right, next one. What best describes, think back your current experience or your past experience, what best describes how much input students, you as a student, had on school decisions, right? So if you felt like you were partners with the staff and a part of the decisions, you're over there for 4. If staff regularly asks you questions and helped you and helped to make decisions and listen to what was shared, there's 3. And then same thing with 2, staff sometimes ask questions to help make decisions, but don't always listen. And then 1, staff make all the decisions, students are not involved, is 1. over there. So there's threes. All right, these are the twos and the ones.
I want you to notice some of the patterns we're seeing as far as movement.
So that's interesting.
Cool. So, this is interesting. Why students or how students are taught, why school is even important. So if you feel like it's a school where it's focusing a lot on telling kids that you got to believe in yourself and, you're learning so that you can navigate this world, no matter the challenges you may face as a person of color or anyone who is coming over something, that's more what we're here for. If you feel like it's a school where they want the students to focus and learn a lot about believing in themselves so they can live a life that they want to choose, right? Maybe being able to get the jobs they want, careers they want. That's more 3. If the focus is more on you're learning so that you can go to college and be successful, right? Or maybe not necessarily just college, but find a way to be successful is more 2. And then if it's more focusing on getting into a really good quote unquote college, right? So you can get a good job and make lots of money. If that's the focus, then maybe it's more of a 1. Okay? I know this one's a little trickier, so you may want to read it to capture the nuance.
Yeah, so whatever one is best describes.
The best describes
So
why
we
you
have
were talking
ones over here.
important. Yeah.
Ones. Where you at? Threes? You stuck in between?
Yeah.
You're 4?
Yeah, I'm like.
Okay. And then
Yeah, I was probably around. Yeah. I was in the middle too, actually. Yeah.
They didn't care about me being brown though.
and this is about the learning material. Right? So one of the things that was mentioned earlier, this notion of being culturally relevant or community responsive. So look at the definitions here, right? Lessons, books, and learning resources used by students support the development of who they are as people, right? Students learning about their own culture as well as other cultures and understanding the purpose of learning. If that describes, you're gonna go over to 4. And just find your spot.
Mine was real.
So I see some people with the ones didn't move.
Yeah. Huh.
Okay.
Uh-huh.
But I want to shout out, there is one teacher that I had in my one place that really did provide for. So
Ah.
thank you, Mrs. Papa.
Yeah.
I hear you.
Yeah.
Flowers to you.
Yeah. There's always exceptions, right? That's fair.
Last one. What best?
Yeah, but to your point, right? There's exceptions, and so let's see if there's exceptions here. What best describes family engagement at your school? So families and teachers at your school are encouraged to communicate frequently with staff, principals. It's a real type of interactive and mutually involved dynamic as far as parents, faculty, staff. You feel that type of, experience, you're gonna go to 4. If you feel like, that's right. And this is, I want you to speak to like how your school encouraged. So not necessarily what your parents or your family or guardians did, but how did you feel like your school encouraged the involvement of your family, right? The third one, if family and teachers at my school communicate often about progress and concerns and updates, my families know how to be and care actively and be actively involved with students.
So you got a 1 group?
Ones, yeah, okay.
4.
Got it.
I also want to point out that you were around 3 and 4 with a lot of the other experiences described, but with this one in particular is 1.
Yeah, they wanted more agency from students. They were like, you guys, we have to show you how to grow up, how to make decisions for yourself. So they didn't bring our families in a lot at all. It was really about what we were doing and helping us directly, but not really bringing our parents in.
And as you think back, what were the kind of pros and cons of that approach? I'm just curious.
So I almost failed sophomore year. My mother had no idea because no one ever asked her to come in to talk about my grades, So it was like, she discovered it and then we had the conversation. I think that our teachers did a really good job. A lot of our teachers were like surrogate parents for a lot of the students, I had a lot of black male teachers in my school, so a lot of them were like surrogate
head back to our seats.
Thank you for sharing that. Yeah.
Appreciate that.
We're going to recircle up to the extent that we can. Yeah. Yeah, we do. We do. So,
How was that experience?
yeah,
Just
thumbs
up,
yeah.
thumbs to the side,
Okay.
thumbs down.
Interesting for me.
It was interesting. Say real quick, and then we'll get into. I can share some context behind that,
Yeah.
behind those questions.
It was interesting to me because I went to a very extremely integrated school, but it was segregated based on your academic performance. And so when I was thinking about the answers, I thought about the answers as it relates to me personally because I was in the academically more gifted part of the school. But I believe I would dare say that the experience of some of my other peers who weren't in those courses had a different experience. Because I don't think that they were valued the same way. I don't think that the school listened to them. They were the kids that was punished the most. If we got in trouble, they met with us. Those kids got I think the experience was different based on your academic performance.
Yeah, that's definitely interesting. We did an activity, won't go too much on a tangent, where we had people think about their own personal experience and then whether or not their personal experience aligned with what the general experience was across the school. Because sometimes your personal experience can be influenced by who your parents are, right? What you have access to, your grades, performance, so on and so forth. All right?
So, quick on this one right here. For those of you who a lot of your responses were in the 4s and 3s, the kind of equity or diversity, equity, inclusion core values that were relevant within your experience might align more with this transformative, right? There was high supports that made it so that school felt like it was a place where parents could be involved, where kids felt like their voice and their joy mattered, right? And the diversity and representation and curriculum mattered. But there was also accountability, right? We didn't know this when we were in those schools, right? We didn't know the meetings and the stuff that was happening to make that happen, right? But when you have high accountability and high support, it leads to transformation. Whereas those of us who were maybe more 2s and 1s in certain areas, that may have been lower areas of accountability to make sure that stuff was actually happening in our school. And then also lower supports.
The two options
That's right.
were focused more on compliance. That was the common thread there. So there may have been like high expectations, but there was low support.
Yep.
It was
Yeah.
low differentiation.
Yeah.
Less about who you are and more around there's this, everybody kind of gets this.
Yeah.
And so, so again, we're going to share these slides and all
Yeah.
that as
Quick note on this.
resources.
Recently, I had the privilege of serving as the Associate Director of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion at a predominantly white institution of a high school. And what was interesting is there was a person that I worked with who didn't want to talk about race, even though we worked in the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. And so what happened was I had all this energy and these ideas. I had been doing work like this for years. And I was doing the work, but with low support. And then the accountability from that person was accountable, but not accountable to the stuff that mattered. And so what happens when you're that person at that school or at that organization who has these great ideas, who have these great initiatives, but there isn't institutional support to execute the work to lead to transformation? So we end up getting these things that actually just hurt kids, right? The nature of our conversation, if we, when we leave here, is to both leave you with some reflection questions and resources, but then also some tangible to-dos that you can leave with to help you think about what transformation looks like and the steps to actually get there.
So just reminding us
Yep.
of we're going to go through a little stretch where Adorian and I are going to just speak a little bit around our work specifically. So when we think about just the big questions here, this whole notion of who and the full who's in the room, and thinking about equity from the perspective of access and success. Also going to talk a little bit around sometimes diversity becomes a soft word. I remember having a conversation with someone, and they talked about the neighborhood their school was in was more diverse. And it actually wasn't. It was just predominantly black. Like, that's not diverse means like differences, right? And so, yes, there are differences based off race. There are differences based off skills and experience and perspectives. But we need to be really clear when we talk about diversity, what type of diversity are we talking about? So it was just interesting that was that person's statement and thinking. But these are the big questions that ground each aspect of diversity, equity, inclusion. And now you'll start to see some more stuff when it comes to this idea of belonging. Again, we'll share this stuff with you, but here are some myths about diversity, equity, inclusion only servicing the quote unquote minority groups. And again, throughout the presentation, we'll definitely engage with that, but I am going to move just in the interest of time. Same thing here.
One quick myth I'll add to, I don't know if you guys might agree with this, but in my experience, particularly the one I was referring to before, the kids were ready for the work of diversity, equity, and inclusion, but sometimes the adults weren't, right? And so what does it look like when one of the impediments to getting the work done aren't the young people? We like to talk about young people as being the problem. But actually, a lot of our young people are the solution, and they're trying to give us solutions. But what happens when the adults aren't ready? How can we create an environment that helps promote that readiness and transformation?
This is a good article that we'll share with the resources. DEI Gets Real. And what I love about this article in particular, I actually used this at a recent professional development I did with our non-school-based folks. And it's this idea and continuing to anchor this notion that we all have of responsibility in this. And speaking about students, this past year we held a student-led conference around some of the initiatives around addressing inequities in the school. And kids came up with some great ideas to address issues and stuff that they see and they experience on a day-to-day basis. So really, again, grounding everyone in this idea of equity being our work. And this becomes like an essential question. And pushing on this idea that as a leader for equity, leader not in terms of having a title bestowed upon you, but the idea of being a leader because you have the opportunity and the ability to invest, inspire, influence, and have an impact on others, right? So for all of us, regardless of whatever our different titles and identities are, student, parent, teacher, educator, mentor, coach, whatever, what does it look like to be accountable as a leader for equity? And how does our leadership, how does what we do lead to more equitable outcomes?
I may come over here so I could click so it'll be quicker. Perfect. So all of us approach this work in equity and inclusion from various sectors. For me, it's really with a focus on program, policy, pedagogy, practice, and partnership. For the purposes of time, I'm going to focus a little bit more on the program and policy because that's where a lot of my work has kind of come into. But inevitably, if you're doing strong programs and policies focusing on diversity, equity, and inclusion, there is a pedagogy of a love and affirmation of all kids and adults who are in space. There is a practice that makes manifest the policies that are in place, right? And even a practice that sometimes disrupt the harmful policies and practices that are in place. And there's partnership, there's collaboration with other individuals, organizations, et cetera, to get the work done. And so, again, a Dorian, born and raised here. My practice is a practice of really empowering and centering the stories of young people, specifically young Black and brown girls here in the city of Newark and outside the Newark area. I started this nonprofit because my life was very normal until it wasn't. When I found out that my dad, on his way to go pay my school tuition in Newark, was gunned and robbed and killed right outside his store. And in that moment, I felt so alone. It wouldn't be until years later I would find out that I actually wasn't that alone. We live in a country where nearly half of all children in the United States experience at least one adverse childhood experience. Maybe it's the loss of a parent or sibling. Maybe it's being a survival of sexual abuse or trauma. What we also know, though, was that Black and brown children in particular are more likely to experience more ACEs than their white counterparts, actually irregardless of socioeconomic class. And so when it comes to equity, we also have to deal with trauma and trauma-informed care and trauma-informed practice that sees our students not as problems, oh, she got a bad, or so, oh, he just bad, but actually young people who may be hurting and need other spaces to heal. Because when we know that this quote of hurt people, we also know that heal people too. And so what does it look like to create an educational ecosystem centered on healing and giving young people the agency to heal themselves in their communities? And that's a lot of what we focus on at She Wins. What we know is that health outcomes, right, the lifespan of folks in our community aren't just determined by what we eat, although that is important. Actually, 80% of the things that affect our lifespan and other qualities of life are related to our environment, right? It's what researchers call the social determinants to health. One of these biggest impactors on our life outcomes are actually our education, right? And so what our experiences in the schools that we've gone through are and how that makes us feel as a person, right? And if you want more resources on social determinants to health, this is a really good graphic to tell you a little bit about that. And so at my organization, She Wins, we focus really on creating a pipeline of college, career, and community-ready young women leaders so that young women who are often most exposed to risk are best prepared for post-secondary success. And we do that by centering on these 3 core values of sisterhood, service, and self-actualization, connecting to others, making sure that young people don't feel alone and know that there is equity, and making sure that no one is isolated. Connection to community, making sure that young people have agency and are not made to feel like victims of society, but actually those who can help solve the issues that most affect their lives. And of course, this makes manifest in self-actualization. Them being able to actually set goals for themselves and accomplish those goals and believe in themselves and help others do the same. Whether our young people are like, all these girls right here from our organization are in Washington, D.C. on Capitol Hill speaking to legislators about issues that affect young women across the globe, or if they're right here at 13th Avenue School reading to young people to help promote early childhood literacy, or if they're here at Rutgers Newark, actually not too far from where we are right now at our Summer Leadership Academy, or at a college tour just a couple weeks ago. We know that when young people are connected to incredible adults like yourself, where they're empowered to connect with themselves, connect with their community, and connect with the world, that is disrupting the inequitable systems that seek to destroy them, right? That focus on youth agency. And so that's one of our young people who actually started with us in 5th grade, now just graduated from university, high school, is at William Patterson. She's like texting me, Mrs. Dwayne, I'm getting all good grades. I'm like, yeah, you better be, right? But this is what happens when we pour into systems, right? And this connects to the P, the partnership bubble within the kind of visual that we shared earlier. Schools and families can't do it by themselves. We need organizations. We need higher education institutions like NJIT. It takes all of us as an ecosystem. And in fact, I will say families can do it by themselves, because my mother's one of those people who was going to make it happen regardless, right? But I do think that it's our job as a society to create, in order for us to have an equitable context, we need to have partnerships with organizations and institutions to help ease the load. And that's the value of work like this. So just a little bit about our organization. And we love this visual right here because this helps us really kind of visualize what equity looks like versus what equality looks like versus what the reality is versus what liberation is. Equality is everybody getting the same thing and being said that, okay, y'all all got the right to vote. Y'all all go to non-segregated schools. So everybody should be making money right now. Everybody should be able to go to college. Everybody. But we realize that, first of all, we're not even starting the game in the same way. And then we also realize that if it is going to be equitable, maybe that's not even enough. Maybe beyond equity, we actually need liberation. So there is an offense to begin with. Mr. Regans, you had an interesting insight on this visual and some other variations of this visual you may want to share.
I think this visual does a good job of kind of illustrating the idea of everything's the same, equity in terms of differentiation and meeting the needs of people, the idea of no barriers existing, which is what real liberation is. What I like about this image in particular is around the advantage versus the disadvantage that these individuals have. But I actually like it when the the height of the three individuals are actually all the same, because there's this like implicit, this implicit bias or deficiency of being short versus being tall. So when you have everybody who's actually the same height, but yet you have somebody who has access to all these boxes versus somebody that has access to one box versus someone who starts under the ground. I think that's also a version of what our reality is, where, people are born biologically, genetically the same. There's no biological difference based off your race, right? That's scientific. However, there are material consequences assigned to your race and other things that put us in categories around just different social structures. And so that's just always like my push on the image itself and how to like take that a step further. What's the next thing?
We know there's a lot of reactions to this. We're gonna, in just a moment, we're gonna have some moments for reflection and pause. This is a story of this is a young person who actually was in our organization since she was like 11 years old, ended up traveling the country, the world, around girls' issues, education issues, and really was talking about education inequity. She would talk about, she thought it was unfair. The kids at her school got suspended for being in non-uniform compliance. Her life really changed where just a couple of days before she was about to apply to college, she got into a car accident and where she suffered an internal decapitation to the point where her head literally separated from her skull. She almost did not live. By the grace of God, she did. But now she's currently paralyzed from the waist down. Today, at 19 years old, this was when she was 17, but at 19 years old, her goal is to actually be an advocate for disability equity, right? To make sure that young people who are in the healthcare system but who are disabled actually have the rights and resources they need, because she has experienced some of the most challenging experiences for anyone to experience, but as an adolescent when it comes to navigating the health system. And so equity, as we know, looks like youth agency. It looks like young people knowing their voice and their power and trying to disrupt those inequitable systems around them. Just a resource for those of us who are thinking about all the ways that young people are impacted when it comes to equity. They're impacted by district and state policies. They're impacted by partnerships in our communities and schools, and they're impacted by what we teach. And so if we're gonna talk about equity, we have to talk about it at all of those levels. Before we transition into some this last section, some of the work that I'm doing as a school board member on equity and diversity and inclusion is making sure that young people have curriculum that's talking about Black and Latino history, making sure that we have opportunities for parents and community members to actually learn about what's happening in the district, making sure we have a policy that's actually holding the district accountable to this work, having a FAFSA graduation policy where young people, in order to graduate from Newark Public Schools, have to fill out the FAFSA. Now, of course, there are workshops that we've created and the various resources that students and parents are able to actually do that. And then even for students who maybe want to opt out, right, of the FAFSA, they have that opportunity. We believe that not every student has to go to college, but every student should have the option to go to college. And one of the reasons why students don't go is often because they just don't even fill out the FAFSA. And so a number of things just to both within our strategic plan, discipline policies, et cetera, to promote equity and inclusion that do extend beyond just having someone be in the position of a diversity, equity, inclusion officer, but having the work live throughout all fibers of the institution, right? It has to live everywhere. It cannot just be in the role, it has to live everywhere.
So some other ways in which we're gonna talk about how this looks, I'm gonna get into some specifics around the work itself. So one, and you can look at that as I give some quick framing. What's important, I really appreciated earlier the message around having about your consciousness and your equity lens, because the Constitution actually has equity in mind. It talks about all people are created equal and everybody should have access and all that sort of stuff. But we all know that it's not executed in the same way. And so, yes, we want to have policies that are written in a way that thinks about everyone. But if we're not executing that policy in that way, it doesn't make any sense, right? And so we got to be accountable to equity in the design. We got to be accountable to equity in the execution. And we have to be accountable to equity in our measurement and how we're measuring the impact. And the thing is that it's not a set of rules. You can't do equity. And so it is important to have the mindset and the consciousness so that you are aware of the impact things are having. You have a level of accountability for everyone. You're thinking with your head in your heart. So these are just some statements that our organization, when we talk about equity as our work, that everything needs to be in service of this. And so if these things are 100% true, then cool, we're doing great. But that's not the case right now, which is why it's the work that we have to do in order to make these things true. And I don't think that regardless of any organization you're in, I don't think anyone would push against this idea that they want consistency and equitable experiences for kids. I don't think anyone will push against the idea that whoever works for that organization does not perceive their identity as barriers, right? I don't think anyone wants to have a situation where there are disparities between how people are paid based off their background, right? I don't think that the long-term impact that you're having on your stakeholders, I don't think that you want things to pan out to be something that's negative. So these are just like general statements that are kind of driving the work. So my priorities, chief equity strategist, what's really important. So one, my role as an executive leader, I get to work with everyone who's on the executive team. And so literally not only as a team we meet, but then I also meet with each individual, and we're focused on priorities that align with being kid focused and people first. So how is the work that you're doing as a chief operating officer impacting the people in the organization? How is the work that you're doing as the chief financial officer impacting the people in the organization? So the idea is that everything that we do has to be in service of more equitable outcomes. Cool, we want to spend more money or spend more of our money in the community. Cool, great. What are some of the barriers that come up? Oh, we don't have accounts with this company, this store or this business or this business. Cool. What do we need to do in order to make sure that we have accounts proactively so that way we can leverage this business and that business when it's time for us to spend money for professional development, right? So it's always centering like, what are we doing that's driving towards more equitable outcomes? You'll see REI. REI is race, equity, and inclusion. This notion of being colorblind, that is something that we just don't support. And so the reason why we say race, equity, and inclusion is not because we don't value diversity, because we do, because if you value inclusion, you value diversity, but there's an intentional focus on race and understanding the impact that race has on people. And we can't get around that. So that is a statement that we take, and so we spend a lot of time talking about what is it, and again, we look at all the other things that play out as well, socioeconomic status, disability, gender, religion, but race being that thing where we need to call out and not be afraid to tiptoe and not be afraid to address it and be direct. Dorian gave a statement that she was a part of a diversity, equity, and inclusion department in a team, and no one wanted to call out the impact that race has. Leadership opportunities, I support some of that. The student support and student discipline practices, we have a number of initiatives where we're going back and looking at some of our policies and how those policies are executed, revisiting just some of our practices in the name of being a lot more responsive, ensuring that we are differentiating our supports. KIPP Newark Alumni Network is this investment in our alums. When we first founded our school, we had this vision that, you go to a good middle school, you're set for life. It's not true. So then it was like, all right, well, we'll have high school. And so we did middle school and high school, and then you'll be set for life. Not true. So, all right, we'll do elementary, middle, and high, and then everything will be figured out. No, that's not how it works. The barriers continue to exist. So even with what you may believe is a world-class education, it is not enough. And so how do we create opportunities to stay in community, to stay engaged, to have access to resources, and continue to leverage those things when we're 25, when we're 30, when we're 35, so on and so forth. Because, America is full, the world, but America in particular is full of additional hurdles. And then with our talent strategy, really being intentional around how we attract folks and what that process looks like, how we develop folks, how we retain folks, and just really being accountable to all of those things. So in my role, I am thinking about the experience that our students are having and the experience that our adult teammates are having. And so these are resources. Our 5-year strategic plan is all anchored around our equity strategy. So that statement is super significant because every organization has a strategic plan, but to have the mindset that what are we going to do in the next 5 years that's going to lead to more equitable outcomes, and recognizing that that is the commitment we need to make is important. These are other resources we have, as I explained before. Without an equity lens, without an equity mindset, the resources mean nothing. And what you'll do is you'll just weaponize those things against folks because you have a bunch of blind spots. You're not addressing your biases. You're not aware of how your upbringing and your experiences can negatively and adversely impact the kids who are in front of you, even with the best of intentions, right? Give a good example of this. As a teacher, I taught in Harlem, not too far from where I grew up, but I grew up with some beliefs around gender. Not necessarily bad beliefs, but this notion of being a gentleman, so on and so forth. And I'm a big brother, had cousins and people, little sister had to look out for. So how does that show up in my classroom? Okay, these two students are bothering one another. The boy says, hey, she's bothering me. My response to him is way different than what my response to the girl when she says the boy is bothering me. So even with good intentions, even though I was once a boy, looked the same and all that, but because of how I process that and what my upbringing is, it impacts how I treat these two students. And so now, just in that moment, I have created an inequitable situation in my classroom because now I am not meeting his needs. I'm going to dismiss it like, oh, she just likes you. Not that big of a deal. Whereas when she tells me he's bothering her, my reaction is completely different. How dare you? That's crazy, so on and so forth, right? And so these things show up in our lives and our decisions all the time, which is why we have to do the work, which is why training doesn't work. It's about development, and how do we continue to focus on development to build a level of consciousness around this. Using surveys, we've always used surveys. And so these are some of the common surveys. People who, their manager, answer a bunch of questions around their experience with the person that manages them. We use typical engagement survey across the organization. Same thing in terms of looking at what's happening in our classroom. But the thing that I really want to key in on, and this ties back to your experience that we created for you earlier, is school health. One of the ways in which we want to assess school health is based off the student experience. So those questions that we used earlier it's a new survey we use called the School Community Diagnostic. And what's incredible about this survey is that we administer this survey to students in grades 4 through 12. We're trying to figure out a solution for the earlier grades just because it's an access thing with the statements and how you read it or whatever. But we administer it to all of our students, grades 4 through 12, all of our families, kindergarten through 12, and then all of our school-based staff. And it's all focused around on the student experience. And so, yes.
Kalina shared this yesterday. I always use the quote, budgets reflect values, but I like the way she said it. She said, what gets measured gets treasured, right? So what you measure shows what you actually treasure within an organization. So if an organization says that they value diversity, equity, and inclusion, but then aren't measuring what they're doing to advance that, then there's a problem. And so surveys, focus groups, things like that actually help get at that. I have the privilege of serving on 2 different boards. One is a locally elected board here in the Newark Board of Education. And then one is on the KIPP National Foundation Board, right? I got to that point because I was an alumni of the KIPP schools, KIPP New Jersey specifically. And so being on a board, and 2 different boards at that, for us, we don't always get to talk directly to, unless you're like me, because me, I'm in schools, I'm talking to principals, I'm talking to young people. But a lot of the board members that I serve with in various positions, they're not always having that same level of access to parents, students, teachers. And so what we measure shows what we treasure. And that's how at the board level, and again, boards make the budgets. They vote on the policies, they vote on the money, right? What we communicate we're doing in our institutions to advance diversity, equity, inclusion helps make sure that that work gets supported and invested in and affirmed across the board.
So one of the most important things about this is that when you center the student experience, then that begins to drive your decisions, right? So it's the same thing as a parent. I'm a parent. My daughter just turned 18. She's a freshman in college. And my son is 12. He's a 7th grader. And one of the things that I started to do more of in recent years is to ask them how the things that I'm doing is landing with them or on them or with them or to them. And it changed everything because I remember my son and I a couple of years ago, we had a conversation, we had a personal situation that happened. And from my perspective, the life that I'm creating for him is way different than what I grew up with. So I'm just like, you ain't got to deal with this. You ain't got to deal with that. Like I listened to things. And it was a moment where he shared something with me that he shared how something that he was nervous and feeling anxious about some things. And it was the same feeling that I had at his age. And at first I was defensive, like, what you mean? Like, you got all these things and all that. And then I had a moment where it's not about that. It's about the impact that these things are having on him. And so, yes, his life may be different in terms of what conditions are around him. The impact is still what the impact is, and I'm accountable for those conditions. So instead of me continuing down being defensive, I had to listen, lean into my curiosity, and learn how he's experiencing these things. And in some situations, that means I had to give him perspective, and I offered it where I could. And then in other situations, I had to take accountability for, regardless of my good intentions, the impact that I was having on him was the impact. And so with surveys like this, when you center the experience of the people, then you put yourself in a situation where you can check to see, are your intentions actually having the impact that you want to have? And so that is what's significant about this survey in particular. And I think regardless of who your stakeholders are, you can sit here and think about what is the experience you want them to have and how do I center that as I am making decisions. And so this is where this becomes super significant. And then it allows us to actually make comparisons. So what you see, this is some baseline data we took. You see the responses from all the school-based staff. And so it was out of a 4, 3, 2, 1. So similarly to what you did, you'll see the responses from students and then the responses from families. And what this did in this pilot is allow us to see where we align and where we don't. And we, for the most part, pretty much agree that the yellow represents the relatively lower scores when it comes to family engagement, when it comes to students, how much input students have on school decisions. This is an area of opportunity that we have across our entire organization to figure out, well, what does that look like? And again, if we want to be a more equitable school, that means that we have to sit here and do something about that. And then so this data begins to drive initiatives to address this. And what's also great about this is that, let's say we administer it this year and we hit a 4, which is, impossible, but on everything, it doesn't mean the year after you're guaranteed that same score, because part of the idea of equity being your work is you have to be responsive to what's going on. And things change, so you have to change with it.
We're getting the signal that we're near time. We
Yep.
do want to leave time for discussion, and then we also want to give y'all access to the QR code so you can have these.
Yeah,
slides.
we got to, yep,
So we
got
can
you.
open the floor for discussions, reactions, and then we'll put up the QR code.
Last thing I want to stamp, because 12:30 is our time, right? 12:30.
12:30.
Let me stamp these last 2 things, and then we're good. Yep. So again, accountable to equity in the design. How are we designing things with equity in mind? How are we executing things with equity in mind, and how are we measuring it? Right? Hiding behind average doesn't hold you accountable to equity. Right? Hiding behind average doesn't do that. So having data that allows you to look underneath is super important. So for our student data, yes, we're looking at students. For the most part, our kids are predominantly Black or identify as Black. We have more kids who don't identify as Black, identify as Hispanic or Latin in Camden. So we don't do a lot of work around differences of race, but we do a lot of work around whether a student has an IEP or not, grade level, and just other factors that we can dig into. With our staff, we now look at data based off of gender, race, background, and a bunch of other questions that we now ask, where we can actually really dig deep and not just hide behind, oh, the average is this. We can look at how are these particular groups or that group is experiencing whatever particular thing. And so it is super important, again, when we talk about our accountability to equity, that we're thinking about it from all those different lenses. And then, again, we'll share this stuff with you, but we do have time and worked it out wise, where before I share just some of the resources that will be available, are there any particular questions that you have or something that we can clarify or just be a little bit more direct to a particular need that you have? And that's the question could be directed at Adorian or I. So any particular question?
Yeah.
Then I'll come over to you next.
My question is really based on a statement that you made, and it is, how does my intention match my impact? And I want to hear from both of you how your intentions, your intentionality in teaching or mentoring, being with students, and in this work, how does it match your impact? Is it matching your impact?
Is my intention matching my impact? In some instances, not. I think depending on the more direct reach that I have, I think it more times than not aligns, and that's because I have the opportunity to ask and to have the needs of that particular person or that thing drive my decisions. I think things that I'm a little bit further removed from, less, but then it's on me to figure out how to learn from that to then make adjustments to meet those particular needs. But at the end of the day, your decision making should be driven by the needs of whatever particular thing that you're trying to serve. And one thing that I wish I did a better job of, even as a classroom teacher, is to let me ask you, what did you learn today? Right? Not what we did today. What did you learn today, and why? And listen to the answer, because then that would have put me in a situation where I could clarify and all that. Because at the end of the day, good communication is not what's said, is what's heard. And so leaning into your curiosity, asking more questions, and having that drive your decisions.
And just to that point, like one of the things that happened a lot in my relationship with you, especially like once I graduated, it was like, so what did you think about the bench? Or what did you think about these things that were happening in middle school, right? When he was my principal, because at that time you were just start to kind of really like accelerate and navigate throughout the organization. And so, young people have the answers, right? If we want to figure out our impact, we have to actually talk to the young people, talk to the adults in our building, because that'll let us know the impact regardless of our intentions. And when you really kind of act responsively to that, that makes a difference. I know for me at the policy level with the school board, I've got a lot of great policies that I've written, but I also have a 164-year-old white supremacist education system that was not designed to serve black and brown students, especially not black and brown students with disabilities, different language needs, poverty, et cetera. And so regardless of the policies, it's about what we do in practice in real time, talking to young people, talking to their parents, talking to the teachers, that's going to make that policy impactful. So it's that both end.
Thank you. How do you guys navigate, like, I'm assuming, or I think that you guys have consulting experience with like DEI work in schools. So how do you deal with admin that are maybe like really scared about offending the other teachers? Like our school is, all of our scholars are black and brown, but all of our staff are white. So like one thing that we have is, it's like I have to tiptoe around like my vocabulary, and I feel like you can't really do this effectively unless you're really honest and like have those hard conversations. But yeah, how do you navigate with admin when they're also like apprehensive about that?
We should definitely connect. Definitely down to talk to you. In short, I think when we talk about our vision, whatever your vision is, every organization has a well-written vision. Nobody's vision when dealing with kids says, we want to mess kids' lives up, right? Everybody has what we want. The first question is that vision 100% alive 100% of the time for 100% of the students? And the answer is what? No, right? And so why not? And then now we have to start to unpack some of the barriers. So the idea is we don't want to weaponize DEI and being conscious and all that sort of stuff. We don't want you to feel bad because you're white. We don't want you to feel bad because you're black. We don't want you to feel bad because anything in between, right? But it's just like, if we want to create the conditions for greater success, we have to take responsibility for the conditions, and that means that we have to develop a consciousness and an awareness to actually do that. So in order to be responsive, we got to be real about what's going on. So I would start with the vision. And if the vision is not 100% alive 100% of the time for 100% of kids, adults, whoever, then that's where that conversation has to start. And then what are some of our next steps?
And student voice is like a great, I know we use the word weaponized, but like student great voice is a weapon in a good way, right? So how can you find ways to center what students are saying, right? So let's say, I don't know what the exact issue is, but I know at the school that I was referring to before, and prior to this, I had been doing a lot of consulting work primarily at predominantly white institutions in the DEI space, working with the students there. But in this particular institute that I was at as a DEI associate director, this person was apprehensive around race, but like the kids weren't. And so when the kids are like, hey, we actually do want to have a Latin American History Month celebration. We actually do want to have a Black History Month celebration. And then it got to the head of school and the board that, okay, the kids want this, but the adults are scared. What does that say about the culture of our institution? Then we have a real problem. So if there's a way that you can leverage what the young people are saying they want and need, everything changes.
Last question, and then we can get up out of here.
I actually wanted to respond to what you said. So I actually used to recruit for him a long time ago. And yeah. And one thing that we did with our leadership team, well, there was a lot of times we would bring people in to interview for teaching staff positions or higher positions, heads of schools, et cetera. And we would have families involved. So that's great. So moms got to say and dads what they wanted for their kids, but not the kids. And when we started to turn, even just for teacher interviews, to say like, hey, did you like this lady that came in today? Right? And the kids are like, nah, miss, we're going to get her. Right? Like when Father Ed said that, I think it was him or maybe it was, right? He was like, not having kids' voice in that space. As a recruiter, I recruited for all of our schools. I saw myself filling classes 2, 3, 4 times same year because we did not ask the kids, did they even like the person? Did she come in and greet you? Did she say hello? And so when you think about trying to find ways to get your admin involved in diversity and equity and inclusion, having kids say to them, you didn't ask me, that is a gut check for an adult. To have a kid tell you that you disregarded me when you think so nobly that you're taking care of children and the children tell you you're not, it humbles anybody. So I would say like in spaces where you're getting pushback, because I would get pushback on types of teachers I was bringing in, types of leaders I was bringing in, but I knew they wanted the best for children because they talked to my children. That is what got a lot of my leaders to say, oh, okay, I wouldn't have picked this person. I wouldn't have hired this person, but the kids like this person. And so I would push it back to students in spaces where you get pushback from adults because we lose sight of kids a lot.
Nah, spot on. It is time. So again, not only do we want to make these resources available, I want to end on a little IG wisdom. I'm new to IG. I've been on IG like 2 years now, whatever the case is. And you know, whenever you spend some time on something, it keeps setting stuff up. But I think this is like poignant when it comes to just this idea of continuing to evolve and in the spirit of doing better and being better, right? And yeah, I think this speaks volume even in the work that we're doing now, right? And just disrupting certain patterns. And just because we went through it doesn't mean we have to sit here and recreate that for others, right? So we do have a QR code that you can scan. And in addition to that, I'll give you, and whoever else, I mean, some people, family in the room, but I'll give you my information. Have no problem, and I say the same for Dorian, if you want to reach out and talk through some things, definitely are down to be resources and also open to receive resources as well. I mean, you know, this is a team sport. So, you know, we need to make that happen, okay? All right, so thanks for your flexibility and your engagement and all that. All right.